Imagine this. You are sitting in a small room, soft light spilling through the window. In front of you is a 92-year-old woman named Margaret. She is wearing a gray wool cardigan, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes bright, deep, and full of experience. She doesn't need papers. She doesn't need a microphone. She only needs to sit there and speak to you in a warm yet serious voice. She gives a gentle smile and says, "You know, when you've lived to the age of 92, people no longer care about frivolous things. You can't take money with you. You can't keep your looks, and you don't have much left to show off. All that remains are lessons. And today, if this is the last time I can share, I want men, especially those stepping into their 60s and 70s, to listen carefully. Because if you listen, maybe you can avoid the mistakes that so many other men have paid for with their very lives." The room falls silent. She bows her head, takes a deep breath, and begins her first story. The first lesson may sound simple, but it is the one that makes many people leave this world sooner than they should. That lesson is health. Margaret looks straight into your eyes, her voice lowering. "My husband, Thomas, was a steel mill worker. He was strong, sturdy. He could lift 100 pounds of steel without his hands shaking. He thought he was invincible. But at age 68, he collapsed in our living room. A heart attack, so quick that I didn't even have time to call 911. The man who had once been the strongest wall in my life was gone simply because he never cared for his own heart." Margaret paused, her voice catching slightly. "You know, what hurts me most is not losing my husband. What hurts me most is remembering how many times I urged him to go for checkups, to cut back on cigarettes, to do a little light exercise, and he would just laugh. 'I'm fine. You worry too much.' Do you know how many men I've seen make the exact same mistake? Trusting their bodies until the day their hearts betray them." She leaned closer to you, almost whispering, "Listen to me, after 70, your heart is not the same as it was when you were 30 or 40. It's more tired, more fragile. If you ignore it, it will remind you, but that reminder often comes as a heart attack or a fall from which you may never rise again." Then she pointed to her chest, her eyes shining with urgency. "Take care of your heart. Walk every day, eat healthy, and get enough sleep. Don't wait until the doctor looks at you and says, 'I wish you had started earlier.' You don't want to hear those words. Health is not something you can bargain with. It is the only capital that, once gone, leaves you with nothing else to trade." Margaret gave a faint smile, but it carried more sadness than joy. If Thomas were still alive today, he would be 95. But he's been gone for more than 2 decades, just because he believed he was too strong to ever fall. Don't repeat that mistake. If you love your family, if you want to see your children and grandchildren grow up, then put your health above everything else. You cannot be a good husband, a good father, a good grandfather, if you no longer exist. The room grew silent once more. She sat still for a moment, her eyes brimming with tears. Then Margaret slowly wiped the corner of her eyes and whispered, "Taking care of yourself is not selfish. It is the gift you give to those who love you. And that is the first lesson I want men to remember." Margaret remained quiet for a while after mentioning her late husband. She took a deep breath, her frail hand tightening slightly around her teacup as if to steady herself. Then she lifted her head, looking straight at you, her eyes glowing as though to emphasize that what she was about to say was no less important. "The second lesson I want men to hear is about the time you give to your family." Her voice trembled, not entirely from age, but from the memories rushing back. "I had an older brother. His name was Robert. He was the kind of man America used to take pride in. Hard-working, laboring long hours on construction sites, bringing home the paycheck to support his family. He always said, 'When I retire, I'll finally have time to take my wife traveling, to be with the kids more.' But do you know what happened? Robert never made it to retirement. At 63, A stroke took him away. Margaret clenched her hand tightly, her gaze distant, as if trying to summon the image of her brother. What breaks my heart is not that he passed away. What breaks my heart is seeing his children standing before their father's coffin, crying and saying, "I wish Dad had spent more time at home with me." Do you understand? No one on their deathbed has ever wished they'd worked more hours. They only wish they had more time with the people they loved. She leaned toward you, lowering her voice as if whispering a secret. American men have always been proud of working hard. But sometimes, in that hard work, you accidentally trade away the most precious thing. The memories with your children, the presence beside your wife, the little moments that will never come back. After 70, you'll realize no paycheck can ever buy back a hug, a family dinner, or that one moment when your son asks you to show him how to tie a tie. She gave a faint smile, though it was heavy with sorrow. Don't be like Robert. Don't wait for someday. Someday is not guaranteed to arrive. If you still have the chance, sit down and have dinner with your family tonight. Call that daughter you haven't spoken to in a month. Hold your grandchild tight before they grow up and become too busy with their own world. You will never regret the time you spent with the ones you love, but you will certainly regret the time you missed. Margaret placed her hand over her chest, her voice softening but still weighted with meaning. Family doesn't need a perfect man. They only need you to be present. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be brilliant. You don't need to fix every problem. You only need to show up, to listen, to love. And that is what men most often forget, until it's too late. Once again, the room sank into silence. Margaret slowly sipped her tea, leaving her words echoing in your mind. The feeling was like a bell of awakening, not loud, but sinking deep. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting far away, as if remembering an old friend. She began slowly, her voice tinged with sadness. You know, the third lesson is about money. Not because I'm greedy, but because I've seen too many men lose a peaceful old age simply because they didn't know how to keep and prepare for themselves. She recalled that many years ago, in the church where she used to attend services, there was a dear friend named Harold, 78 years old. Harold had once been a strong man, working his whole life in construction, earning good wages, never short of money in his hands. He often told his friends, "I make money to enjoy it. Life is short. Why save?" And indeed, Harold spent freely, changing cars constantly, taking his family on trips everywhere, but he never thought about saving or investing. Then one day, his health began to fail. When the hospital sent bills amounting to tens of thousands of dollars, Harold was nearly penniless. His wife had already passed away, and his children had their own families to care for. And so, a man who had once been proud, who had always declared he could take care of everyone, ended up having to rely on his children to pay off his debts. Margaret's eyes glistened as she recalled. I still remember the look in Harold's eyes, a father sitting in front of his children, filled with shame. He once believed he was the pillar of the family, but in the end, he became a burden. Not because he didn't love them, but because he didn't prepare. Margaret leaned closer to you, her voice firm. Men often think financial responsibility only means raising their children, putting food on the table, and providing for the family day by day. But the truth is, the greatest responsibility is taking care of yourself in old age. If you don't save, if you don't plan, if you don't pay off your debts, then one day, the people you love most will have to carry that burden. And that is a silent betrayal of them. She gently squeezed your hand, her eyes glowing with determination. Don't wait until you're 70 or 80 to regret it. Money isn't everything, but without it, old age will be full of tears. Preparing today is the gift of peace for tomorrow. Remember this, being a man is not only about working hard, it's about leaving your family with security, even when you're no longer here. Then Margaret smiled softly, as if easing her own tension. I've lived to 92, and I can tell you this clearly, No wealth is greater than the peace of knowing you will not be a burden. That is true richness. Margaret gave a faint, sorrowful smile, her eyes drifting toward the window where the late afternoon sun slanted through. The fourth lesson I want to share with you, it's about friendship and the loneliness that old age brings. This is something many men never prepare for until it crashes down on them. She recalled an old neighbor named Walter, 81 years old. Walter had once been a successful businessman, busy with work, surrounded by dozens of social connections. But when he retired, little by little, all those business friends disappeared. He no longer had colleagues, no longer had the lively gatherings, and because in his younger years he focused only on his career, he never maintained close friendships. His wife passed away early, and his children lived in other states, busy with families of their own. Margaret spoke slowly. I still remember seeing Walter sitting alone on his porch, every single day, just staring at the road in front of his house with no one ever stopping by. A man who once held so much power, in the end, worn down by loneliness. She turned to you, her voice sinking low. You know, loneliness doesn't kill as fast as illness, but it eats away at the heart little by little. I've seen too many elderly men and women live many more years, but without joy, without anyone to share life with. And they fade away like a candle slowly burning out in silence. Margaret tightened her grip on your hand, emphasizing every word. Men often think all they need is family, that friends are just frivolous. But when family becomes busy, when children are no longer around, you will feel how painful that absence truly is. That's why you must never take friendship lightly. Keep a few true friends, make the phone calls, arrange the walks, nurture those bonds. Because when you grow old, friends are the medicine for loneliness, the mirror that reminds you your life still has meaning. She sighed softly, then smiled warmly. 92 years of life have taught me one thing, that wealth is not only money or health, but also having someone to laugh with, to cry with, and to sit in silence with, and still feel peace. Don't let your old age be nothing more than four walls and the ticking of a clock. Prepare for yourself friendships that last, because that is how you protect your soul from the destruction of loneliness. Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes seeming to sink into distant memories. Her voice grew warm but carried a trace of sorrow. The fifth lesson, perhaps the one I cherish most, is about love and a life partner. When you walk through a long lifetime, you'll realize the most precious thing is not fame, not fortune, but having someone by your side, holding your hand through all the ups and downs. She spoke of her husband, Richard. They married when Margaret was just 21. Life was not easy then. Richard worked in a factory, while Margaret was a secretary at a small school. Money was never abundant. Sometimes they barely had enough for a few simple meals. But instead of letting hardship divide them, they chose to face it together. She remembered. There were nights when they sat at an old wooden table, eating bread while figuring out how to pay the electricity bill, and then bursting into laughter when they realized that as long as they had each other, every difficulty suddenly felt lighter. Margaret paused, her eyes dimming. Richard passed away when he was 79. You know, losing a life partner is unlike any other pain. The house is still the same, the kitchen is still the same, but everything feels empty. It took me years to learn how to sit at the table alone without breaking into tears. Margaret turned to you, her voice firm. Men often value their careers, their friends, their hobbies, but sometimes they take for granted the bond with their life partner. Remember this. A wife is not just the woman beside you in your youth. She is the one who will grow old with you, who will share every backache, every sleepless night, every moment when you feel at your weakest. Never assume that love is automatic. It must be nurtured, cared for, and appreciated every single day. Margaret gently held your hand, her eyes glistening. And if one day you must face loss, allow yourself to grieve, but don't close your heart. Love never truly dies. It remains in every memory, in every little habit. Live on with gratitude, because you were once given the gift of loving and being loved fully. She smiled tenderly, her voice trembling but warm. I have lived to 92, and the greatest lesson marriage has taught me is this. To love and to be loved is the only gift that time cannot steal. Everything else will fade, but the memory of love will always remain. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her frail hands interlacing, her voice lowering. The sixth lesson I want you to remember is to learn how to forgive and let go of the past. My dear, old age is like a book almost completely written. But what makes many people suffer is that they keep turning back to the old pages, unwilling to close them and keep writing the rest. She told you about her younger brother, John. They had once been very close, but a small dispute over land drove them apart for more than 20 years. Every holiday, every family reunion carried an empty space, a silent tension. Margaret admitted, I lost decades of my life living in the shadow of that anger, and in the end, I was only hurting myself. When John suddenly died of a heart attack, Margaret finally understood the futility of resentment. She said, her voice breaking, I cried endlessly at the funeral, not only because I missed my brother, but because I regretted the years wasted holding on to a wound that could have been healed long ago. She turned to you, her eyes stern. You see, anger and resentment are like a heavy stone you carry on your back. They don't hurt the other person. They only exhaust you, bend your shoulders, and age you faster. Forgiveness doesn't mean you approve of someone's mistake. It means you free yourself. Margaret paused, then smiled with gentle relief. At 92, I've learned that a peaceful heart is worth more than any victory, more than proving who was right or wrong. Forgive your parents, because they were only learning how to be parents along their own journey. Forgive your friends, your partner, and yourself. Let go of the past, because the time you have left is far too precious to waste on old wounds. Margaret squeezed your hand tightly, whispering as if entrusting something to you. When you forgive, you are giving yourself the gift of peace. And that peace will stay with you until the very end of your journey. She sat in silence for a long while, her eyes gazing out the window where the sunset slowly descended. Her voice grew slow and gentle, yet soaked in life's hard-earned wisdom. The final lesson, the seventh lesson, is about the true meaning of life and what you will leave behind when you're gone. My dear, many people spend their whole lives chasing money, fame, and fleeting things that cannot be taken with them when they close their eyes for the last time. The only thing that remains is the mark you leave in the hearts of those around you. She recalled that when she was young, she thought success meant having a bigger house, a more prestigious job, or a higher degree. But looking back, what made her happiest was not the first car she owned, nor the paycheck at the end of the month, but the evenings when the family gathered around the dinner table, the laughter of grandchildren in the yard, the heartfelt thank you from an old student who came back to see her. You know, Margaret smiled, I realize the greatest legacy is not in what you own, but in the memories, the lessons, and the love you sow into the world. When you show kindness, when you give a piece of advice that helps someone stand tall, or even just offer a hug that lightens their sorrow, that is your spiritual legacy. And it will outlive bricks and dollar bills. She looked straight into your eyes, her voice both firm and warm. Ask yourself, if tomorrow were your last day, how would you want people to remember you? As someone harsh and calculating, or as someone compassionate and full of love? Start living by that answer today. Because you cannot choose how many years you'll have, but you can choose the mark you leave in each one. Margaret held your hand again, her eyes glowing with conviction. I have lived 92 years, and what I leave behind is not wealth, but stories, lessons, and a family that knows how to love one another. That is all I hope the next generation will carry forward. And you too, live in such a way that when you are gone, the small world around you will be better because you once existed. She smiled softly, the sunset crowning her silver hair like a halo. That is the true meaning of life. And that is the eternal legacy of a human being. Margaret fell quiet, her eyes shimmering with tears, but her smile still lingering. Her voice drifted like a gentle breeze, yet it sank deep into your soul. My dear, 92 years of life have taught me that we do not live forever, but love, kindness, and the lessons we leave behind can outlast even our own lifetime. She had made mistakes, she had fallen, she had cried, but above all, she had loved, she had forgiven, and she had learned how to find peace within her own soul. If there is one thing she wants you to remember, it is this. Live in such a way that every day is worthwhile, because none of us knows how many days we have left. She gently held your hand, her eyes carrying the weight of an entire lifetime. Your life will one day be like a book. Don't let it be filled only with blank pages or sorrowful chapters. Write into it kindness, love, and sincerity. That is how you will leave your mark for the generations that follow. A pause lingered, then she smiled playfully. I've shared with you the 7 lessons of my life. But you know, there are many more things I wish the younger generation could learn sooner. Would you like to hear them? She pointed outward, as if guiding you toward a new journey. If you want to discover the lessons that most people only realize when it's too late, the truths of life that everyone will eventually face, then watch the next video. It will change the way you see old age and life itself.